around the nation, TYT Nation, Jeff Waldorf here. Welcome to the show, guys. It's Wednesday. It's hump day. Half the week's over. We've got great stories, so stick around for the next hour. We go around the nation with some of the best stories and progressive political commentary from around the nation. So we, of course, we're going to talk about some of the testimony that happened yesterday, including, of course, more damning evidence against President Trump, including the cover-up. And how there are things in the official transcript. No, I'm sorry, not official transcript, but the White House memo that was released that happened to be missing. So what are those things? We'll talk about that. We also have another story where John Bolton, and this makes me very uncomfortable, but here's what we do on the show. We're honest. Where John Bolton, again, is kind of the good guy. Ugh. Yikes. Hate it. Okay, so now there's that story. Then we've got some more evidence of the anti-Sanders bias in corporate media. So, I mean, you guys know this already, but there's a lot of people out there, who watch CNN who might not be aware that what CNN is showing, the things that they're doing, are trying to downplay Bernie Sanders. And of course, we've got polls and stuff and screenshots, images to show that. And so, we've got receipts. We also are going to talk about a journalist that was arrested on what he calls baseless charges by the U.S. government. His crime: supporting the lawful government of Venezuela. Okay, so and that's not even 100% what he did. It's basically just reporting on what's actually going on when it comes to Venezuela. So interesting stuff there, potentially disastrous. And so we've got that story. And then we have, of course, Republicans laughing about empty food banks. Lovely. So that's what we've got going on in the news today. That's what I plan on talking about. Like I said, a lot of stuff. Please, if you haven't already, like and share the stream. Really, really important that you do so. Helps out greatly. Like, share, support, follow us on Twitter, etc. There's some of you on there on Twitter that are fantastic, that always share out the show. I really appreciate you guys and gals that do that. So, again, really, really helpful. Thank you so much to the ones who actually are able to do so and who do so. Thank you. Okay. So now, as usual, halfway through the show, take a break, come back, and we'll, of course, read some super chats if we have them. Also, member comments. So that's one of the perks of membership, is that your comments always end up at the top, and I read those first before I read any other comment. And so, hey, hit that join button and become a member. And look, it doesn't matter what tier you are, $1.99, $4.99. Doesn't matter. You're a member. You're supporting the show. You guys get first priority when it comes to reading your comments. So that's kind of awesome. And of course, if you have any questions as well, super chats are great for questions. Finding out hey, what do I feel on this particular subject? Go ahead and ask me. And your question will obviously get priority over anybody else's. So that's just it's one thing that I can do for you guys as channel members, and to thank you for supporting the show. All right. Anyway, so I guess we can get into the show, into the first story here. Let's talk about the Ukraine call and some things that apparently seem to be missing from it. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
We have now even more testimony against Donald Trump. So now this was from, of course, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, who testified on Tuesday. And of course, he works in the National Security Council. And so that's in the Trump administration, by the way. So you can't really call him a never Trumper, which of course they already have been doing. But he confirmed during testimony that there was a cover up involved of the infamous July 25th call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. So now the New York Times first is reporting that Lieutenant Colonel Vindman told House committees during a sworn deposition that the transcript had left out, quote, crucial words and phrases. Now, that, of course, is something that I have been suspecting for quite some time, that they are leaving certain things out because they might look really bad for the president. So now the assertion that some portion of the conversation, according to CNN, was replaced by an ellipsis contradicts the White House's statement in September that the ellipsis in the transcript did not represent missing words or phrases. So that, of course, is a complete lie. It's a fabrication. It also contradicts the president, who has insisted the transcript the White House released was an exact depiction of the call, even though the memo itself describes it as rough. It is a rough memo, yet, of course, Donald Trump, as well as Fox News, they say it's an exact transcript that has been found to be a lie. So now, we knew that, like I said. The transcript, not actually a transcript. It was edited. It's a memo. It removed words and phrases that looked kind of bad for the president, which would explain, of course, why the recording of the call itself and the real transcript is hidden somewhere in a private server. So now let's get to what was removed, because, of course, the context is important here, right? Now, the omissions, according to Colonel Vindman, included Mr. Trump's assertion that there were recordings of former Vice President Joe Biden discussing corruption in Ukraine. So President Trump believes that there's tapes, this is the first that I've ever heard of it, of Joe Biden, and he's like, I got to find the tapes. We got to find the tapes. Let's do the investigation. Not only that, but there was an explicit mention by Ukraine's President Zelensky of Burisma Holdings. That's the company, of course, whose board employed Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, and paid him $50,000 a month, despite not knowing anything about Ukrainian gas. And so now that's important because he's literally saying, Burisma, that's the company, and that is exactly what Donald Trump wanted him to look into. Okay, again, the allegations that the Bidens are behind some corruption in Ukraine, which, look, if we're serious about corruption, you could look at the institutional systemic corruption and think, well, yeah, getting paid a lot of money or having your son get paid a lot of money, you're in a position of power in the hopes that it might influence you to be more friendly towards our policy. Again, that's what we call systemic corruption. And yes, we should definitely eliminate that. We should definitely go after that kind of, these kind of contributions, these kind of conflicts of interest. And that's perfectly fine if you want to bring that. Like, if you want to actually do that. Again, I actually want to tackle real corruption. But unfortunately, what we have is a president who is also politically corrupt. And so what he was doing is pressuring a foreign leader to do these investigations, not to go after corruption, no, to help his chances in an election, to get rid of one of his biggest rivals at the time, which, like I said, was Joe Biden. And something that doesn't get talked about was a mention as well, not in this, not with Ukraine, but also attempts to try to investigate Elizabeth Warren, another one of his larger rivals. So I would say that's a bit of a problem. All right. So now these edits, right? So now, other than the edits, Vindman did help the White House a little bit by saying that the White House's rough transcript was mostly accurate. Now, again, he's saying, look, except for those things that were removed and that I tried to get put back in, and that's what he testified. He's like, look, they took it out. I knew that was wrong. I was kind of disturbed by it. I went to my superiors, and I also wanted to get that stuff put back in so that we have an accurate record of what happened. He tried to put it back in. His requests were denied. And of course, the transcript, I should say the memo, was released as it was released, which, in my opinion, was already damning enough without those edits. So, anyway, now, let's see. Now, finally, the Times added that Colonel Vindman did not testify to a motive behind the White House editing process. So now that's also important, right? Because right now, there are Republicans, there are Trump supporters that are smearing Colonel Vindman as someone who has dual loyalty to Ukraine, right? He's got a dual loyalty to Ukraine. He's going after Donald Trump. He's a never Trumper. All that stuff to try to cast light or cast his testimony as politically motivated, right? And against the wishes of the president. So here's the thing. He's doing his best to try to remain apolitical. He does not want to appear partisan. He says, I don't know the motive. I'm not going to really testify to a motive. All I'm saying is that this is what happened. This was the call. I was disturbed about it. I reported it to my superiors. I ran up the chain of command. I wanted to put those things back in so that I was not involved in any sort of cover-up. I'm just doing my job because, look, I'm a patriot. I believe in this country. And throughout his testimony, there were numerous references to him being a patriot and caring about truth. And I believe him. I believe him. I believe he was trying to do the right thing. And so, look, any motive would be speculation on his part, again, because he's not the president. And so he wouldn't know. It makes sense that he's trying to stick to the facts. Now, the president also wanted an investigation, like I said, into Biden. And this is the whole purpose, right, of the call and of setting up these meetings. Because, look, the Trump administration had been trying to push Ukraine into doing these, doing basically a public announcement that they were doing an investigation into Biden in order to help, like I said, their political chances. So they could point at that and say, oh, look, corruption in Ukraine, it looks like Joe Biden is 100% corrupt. And look, I actually do believe that Biden is corrupt, but again, is systemically corrupt. And I can point to him taking money from a super PAC. Okay. Yes, I think that is corruption. I think taking money from corporations and special interests and then doing their bidding is a form of corruption, but it's not the kind of corruption that Donald Trump is talking about. And what Donald Trump is talking about is possibly criminal corruption or wanting to make it criminal corruption and therefore having it disqualify him from the presidency. So that's not what we're talking about here, right? But what President Trump had done, and we see it in the memo, is pressure that foreign leader, which is illegal. And then, of course, the White House, upon seeing that transcript, goes, oh my God, this looks really, really bad. We're going to edit that, and we're going to lock the original away in a private server. And so I think, look, this testimony, to me, is damning. It's damning of this president's misconduct, as well as the administration's efforts to deliberately hide this from the public. Again, you cannot solicit help from a foreign country when it comes to an election. And as much as MAGA guys want to, whine and cry about it, that's the law. Simply. And it'd be just as illegal if a Democrat had orchestrated the same thing. But here's the thing. I believe we have a cover-up. And now we have the president, of course, that has been lying about this so-called transcript. Remember, he called it a, quote, perfect transcript. It's perfect. In reality, it was doctored, edited, hidden from the public. And the only people who do that kind of stuff are criminals. Okay. So let's go to another related story. we have yet more Trump officials that are testifying in front of House impeachment investigators. So now, this time, one of the people making testimony, or one of the people testifying, uh, actually talked about Rudy Giuliani. So now, Giuliani, of course, right now has a role, or played a role in the campaign to pressure Ukrainian government into investigating Donald Trump's political enemies, as well as trying to discredit the Mueller report. Now, we know that. We also know that Giuliani does not work for the State Department. He's Donald Trump's personal lawyer. And yet he seems to be acting on as a member of the State Department. He's trying to do diplomacy on behalf of the president. So that actually did worry quite a few people in the Trump administration, including John Bolton. And this is according, of course, to testimony from State Department Foreign Service Officer Christopher Anderson, who is telling investigators that former National Security Advisor Bolton had cautioned him about Rudy Giuliani and his efforts. So that's interesting, right? In fact, he said that Giuliani was, quote, a key voice with the president on Ukraine, which would complicate U.S. goals. Now, U.S. goals, of course, in Ukraine would be to, of course, protect Ukraine from Russian aggression. And that Russian aggression, of course, came to a head when Russia had annexed Crimea. So, understandably, Ukrainians were actually very, very concerned that Russia would, do something similar or encroach on their territory even more. And so they turned to the United States for aid. And until the Trump administration, the United States had no problem supplying aid, money, weapons to Ukraine to stand behind them to make sure that Russia does not get more aggressive and try to seize more territory. But what happened, like I said, in the Trump administration is that Trump held up nearly $400 million worth of that aid that was already passed by Congress in order to try to pressure the Ukrainians into doing an investigation into Burisma and Joe Biden, as well as an investigation into CrowdStrike, which they falsely claim is a Ukrainian company that has some sort of hidden server that contains information that would discredit the Mueller report and that hacked by Russia. Okay, so yeah, again, that's a conspiracy theory. There's literally no proof of that. There is no server in Ukraine, and yet they said, "Well, you know what? We want you to look anyway. We want you to launch this giant investigation as a favor to me because we've been very, very good to you, Ukraine. I mean, look at all the money. I mean, we're very good to you." And the State Department, of course, under Trump, had well, I'm sorry, not the State Department, but Trump himself held up this money that was already approved to go to Ukraine. And so that's what we have going on so far. Now, okay. So now this shows, by the way, speaking of the administration, they were concerned about Giuliani and his back channel involvement with U.S.'s Ukrainian policy and his push for those investigations into Democrats. Now, of course, they were actually pretty worried before the infamous July 25th phone call between Trump and Zelensky, as of course, Giuliani had traveled to Ukraine multiple times prior to that. Okay. Now, at Focus is a June meeting in which he said that Bolton expressed support for the administration's goals of strengthening energy cooperation between the U.S. and Ukraine and getting new Ukraine leader Volodymyr Zelensky to undertake anti-corruption reforms. Now, however, Bolton had cautioned that Mr. Giuliani, like I said, was a key voice for the president on Ukraine, which could be an obstacle to increased White House engagement. Now, again, we know that Giuliani was helping Trump push these investigations into the Bidens under the guise of fighting Ukrainian corruption, which ironically didn't involve very many Ukrainians. He was setting up meetings, working with several Ukrainian-born businessmen, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, to try to set up gas deals with the Ukrainian government. Okay, using a private company, by the way. Now, we also know that Giuliani was paid about $500,000 for his work with Parnas, by Parnas's company. And they were all looking into, like I said, together to get dirt on Joe Biden. Now, apparently, Bolton didn't seem to be a fan of that effort, despite, of course, sharing similar goals. For example, Bolton wanted to sell more natural gas to the Ukrainians. Well, that makes sense. Bolton is incredibly conservative. And so, of course, he would want to have some sort of deal. But he's looking at Giuliani like, this guy's going to mess it up because he's an idiot. And look, we don't know 100% why Bolton was concerned. But again, I would assume that Giuliani, since he was not part of the government, could, I guess, get in the middle of negotiation without actually having clearance to be able to do so. Or, like I said, Giuliani's just not a smart guy, and he could blunder his way out of it. I don't know. Maybe it's a combination of different factors. We'll have to find out if Bolton ever does get a subpoena and answers that subpoena. Either way, Bolton seems to have gotten in the way of President Trump's efforts in Ukraine when it comes to these investigations. Now, Anderson, back to Chris Anderson here, he's also testifying that the Trump administration had blocked the statement condemning Russian aggression towards Ukraine. So now, this happened in November of 2018, right? Russia had seized Ukrainian military vessels in the Sea of Azov, which, of course, the State Department said, no, we must go out and we must condemn that. Except that, according to Anderson, Trump blocked it. So now he says, quote, in a statement, while my colleagues at the State Department quickly prepared a statement condemning Russia for its escalation, senior officials in the White House blocked it from being issued. Now, I'm kind of curious as to why this was blocked in the first place. Why would you block a condemnation of Russia? Very, very interesting. It's just something maybe to think about, right? That's involved with this testimony. Now, there's another, by the way, in addition to Anderson, another Foreign Service officer set to testify today, and that's Catherine Croft. Now, Catherine Croft says that at her time at the National Security Council, she had received multiple phone calls from a lobbyist named Robert Livingston, telling her that the then ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, should be fired. Again, that was another thing that Giuliani, that Trump had actually pushed for. Remember, they wanted to get rid of that lawyer, or I'm sorry, not that lawyer, but by that ambassador, because she was supposedly corrupt. In reality, she wasn't pushing for these investigations. And so, interesting, right? In fact, here's the argument, though, that they used against Yovanovitch. Quote, he characterized Ambassador Yovanovitch as an Obama holdover. This is the lobbyist, Livingston, and associated with George Soros. It was not clear to me at the time or now to whose direction or whose expense Mr. Livingston was seeking the removal of Ambassador Yovanovitch. So, look, could it be somebody Giuliani had hired? I don't know. Could it be Lev Parnas, Iger Fruman? I don't know. Could it be Donald Trump? We don't know yet. But I'm assuming this testimony, which is currently ongoing, we might find out some answers. Or ongoing testimony. So that's very interesting. Because again, you've got these lobbyists now calling up and saying, get rid of this Ukrainian, this ambassador. And let's put in our guy. Because that's an Obama guy. They're not playing ball with our efforts to try to, access Ukraine or, get the Ukrainians to buy our natural gas and do these energy deals. And they're something with George Soros, which is incredibly strange. But then again, conspiracy theories. Donald Trump believes in them. These insane conspiracy theories, like I said, with CrowdStrike and George Soros and funding the caravans and all this ridiculous stuff. So it wouldn't be surprising if you had Giuliani or President Trump putting this Robert Livingston on the payroll. I don't know for sure. I don't know. But I tell you what, this testimony from all these different people, for one, they showed that the Trump administration was definitely doing a pressure campaign when it came to Ukrainian politics and to do investigations into the Bidens. Um, and of course, it also suggests to me that there's a lot of different people that are bringing up a lot more questions. There's a lot more questions that need to be answered uh, by this, people who are being brought before the House, impeachment inquiry. And so hopefully we get to find out some of these answers and get to connect all the different pieces of the Trump administration's goals in Ukraine and how it relates to Biden, how it relates to the Russians, and I guess what the entire purpose of it is. Should be fascinating. Okay. All right. So that is Ukraine stuff. Um, I'm going to take a quick break here. We'll come back. We have CNN versus Bernie Sanders. So very interesting story on that about media bias. And also that journalist getting arrested and Scott Walker. So interesting stuff. Please like and share the stream. And we're going to come back here in a couple of minutes. So super chats, questions, comments, etc. We'll take those. Thanks some patrons. Thanks some members. Right after we come back from this break. Run the nation. Stay right here. We'll be right back.
Mike Pence.
Welcome back to the show. Around the Nation right here, TYT Nation. Jeff Older with you. Okay, so got a lot of comments as well as some members to thank and things like that. So let's go with Patreon first. So I want to give a shout out to Leon Chow, Liliana Flores, Linda, and Loretta Keene. So patreon.com/TYT Nation. It's one way you can support us. Another way, of course, is through memberships, which unfortunately I don't have up for some reason. I thought that I had that already. Okay, while I do that, I do want to give a shout out as well to Patricia Knowles, who donated through our PayPal. So thank you, Patricia. Really appreciate that. All right, so I'm bringing up memberships now. And let's see. I want to thank Michael Bayat, Tyler Sutton, and Kenneth Mann. So thank you to those people who have joined our YouTube membership program. You can do that by hitting the join button below. And then, let's see. Let's get to some comments. All right. So member comments here from Sarge Tech says, Putin is Trump's BFF, so no condemnation of Russia. Just keep smiling. Yeah, look, they certainly got, the Trumps certainly got a lot of money from the Russians. So I'm just saying, yeah, it would make sense. Now, Jeanette Villalona says, Trump, the treasonous moron. And then we have Actus Magos here. Says, Republicans always say everything is against him. Or, I'm sorry, Republicans say everything is against him is politically motivated. It's the only argument they have because they can't defend their clear and blatant illegal activities. Look, in the case of Trump, like I said, you know, you have this dual loyalty smear. Just imagine. I mean, these same Republicans that are saying this are the same ones that went after Ilhan Omar for, you know, allegedly doing the same sort of dual loyalty smear against, you know, people who support AIPAC. I mean, I remember her getting in a lot of trouble for that. When that's of course not at all what she meant. She was actually, and look, Ilhan Omar has gotten herself in trouble again for something that I actually will criticize her for, but that's not today. But on that, no, she's not anti-Semitic. No, she was saying something about that it's about the Benjamins, right? It's about the money. They take money from these political action committees, these politicians do, and suddenly, of course, they tend to agree with these special. I know it's weird, right? That's absolute corruption. That's why we say take no corporate PAC money, take no super PAC money, take no corporate or donor money at all, except for small dollar donations. And that is until we get public financing of elections. All right. And then finally, Andrew Grew says, I'm not sure what's dumber, Trump doing this or him thinking Biden is a rival. Well, to be fair, at the time, Biden was crushing in all the polls. But as you're going to see from some of the new polls, Biden is falling and falling hard. All right. So that's a good segue to lead me to this next story here. And that is a CNN poll, or I should say CNN's bias against its own polls. It's crazy. All right. CNN just can't admit when Bernie Sanders is having a good day or a good poll. Recently, you have a new poll here out by CNN in New Hampshire, where Bernie Sanders has taken, in recent days, a commanding lead. Now, this is following the heart attack. This is following the poll performance and, the debate performance, and also the numerous endorsements from Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So now, you wouldn't know Bernie Sanders is doing incredibly well if you only look at some of the headlines on CNN. Now, according to the most recent New Hampshire survey, Bernie Sanders is now leading at 21%. So now it's a rise of about 2 points since July, and is now a 3-point lead over Senator Elizabeth Warren, who is currently at 18%. So now this follows a precipitous drop for Joe Biden in New Hampshire. Now, Joe Biden, since July, has lost 9 percentage points. Yikes. Now, the result of this, of course, is here you have two progressives, one arguably way more progressive than the other, but two people who have fairly good plans. Bernie Sanders, of course, has the best, the most boldest progressive vision, that are leading in New Hampshire, one of the very key states in early voting, right, in the primary, and Joe Biden falling like a rock. So now the results here, by the way, do have a margin of error of plus or minus 4 percentage points. So look, you could have Sanders that it's tied with Warren. You could have Sanders ahead of Warren. You could have Warren ahead of Sanders. But in no way could Joe Biden be leading the field anymore, or even in number two. Biden, distant third. Even in the best scenario for him, still in third, right? And those are facts. And we're fair on this show. And we point out that, hey, look, you could have something different. Maybe Bernie Sanders isn't quite in the lead, but it's really, really close. Now, the big headline here should be progressives top Biden. Instead, you have headlines like this: Buttigieg in fourth, but a strong fourth. Buttigieg. Now wait a minute. Look, yes, is Buttigieg in fourth place, according to this poll? He is. Yes, those are facts, right? Now, Buttigieg is actually polling at a respectable 10%, right? But at the same time, Buttigieg has had no change in his polling in New Hampshire since July. So he is stagnant. He is stuck in fourth place. Now, that could be good. It could be bad, right? Because for example, you saw Kamala Harris, who after her debate performance with against Tulsi Gabbard, actually fell precipitously. And so you've got people like Buttigieg that are taking advantage of that. But again, he hasn't really moved in this New Hampshire poll. Now imagine, for example, if Bernie Sanders were stuck at fourth with zero movement. Consider the headlines, right? Sanders stagnant, should drop out. Sanders movement fizzles. I mean, I'd come up with these all day, right? Instead, he comes in first in this poll. And yet, here you have barely a mention in these headlines, right? Now, one of the mentions is, and this is about the best that you can get, Sanders and Warren sit at top in New Hampshire, but no clear front runner. No clear front runner. I don't know about that. Again, you could even say that Elizabeth Warren is a front runner, and you would be kind of correct because she's actually been doing really, really well in a lot of these early state polls. Sometimes overtaking Bernie, sometimes tying with Bernie and Biden. And so Elizabeth Warren's doing incredibly well. And again, those are just facts, right? But CNN says no clear front runner. By the way, Buttigieg, strong fourth. Right. More headlines. And this is actually more fair as well. Disappointing poll for Biden. Okay, I'll take that one, right? And here's another one. Early state primary voters much more undecided than voters nationally. Okay, so again, Bernie Sanders winning this poll, right? Now CNN looks at that and says the voters must be undecided because here we have Bernie Sanders. But who in their right mind would vote for Bernie Sanders, they think? Well, I mean, he's angry and it says the same thing. It talks about policy and he's old and he just had a heart attack. Who would vote for him? They must be undecided. Now, look, to be fair, in the poll, about 23% of New Hampshire voters definitely know who they're going to support. And so there is time, of course, for more people to gain more support in the field. Okay, again, we're being incredibly fair, right? But I think CNN, some of these pundits, have the bias of no, they're undecided because right now they're letting progressives win. Why aren't they choosing people like Buttigieg? He's in a strong fourth. No, don't pay attention to these polls. Too early, too early. And finally, I love this one. It's my favorite. This is a historically unprecedented New Hampshire mess. Real headline from CNN. I wonder why the writers would consider this poll a mess. Every other poll, like I said, where Bernie is second, third, or even fourth, which I don't think he's had a poll where he's fourth, but nonetheless, they can't stop talking about how Bernie Sanders is done. No momentum, failing, slipping, not going to make it, should drop out now. But when, again, he polls well and is even in a third way tie with Biden and Warren, they ignore it and they focus on people like, again, not to pick on him, but Buttigieg. Strong fourth. I can't get over that. And now they also do these graphics where they appear to be having a hard time trying to consider what is top tier, right? So let me go to that because this is fascinating. So here we go. Take a look at that. All right, so no, that's a fair graphic, right? You see Sanders 21, Warren 18, the results of this poll. Top tier, you see next to them, right? Wonderful. Okay, so that's incredibly fair. But right after they have this graphic, they put this up. Top tier, Biden, Warren. Same. Wait. Sanders is 21, same percentage, but Biden, Warren, 22. Sanders apparently is not top tier. 1 point top tier. I mean, again, that's the bias, right? It's misleading. And if you don't believe that there's a bias against Bernie Sanders in the media, I'm not sure how much more obvious CNN can make it. But see, here's the thing. There's a lot of people that just don't pay attention as much to politics. And so they don't catch this. They don't understand that CNN does have a bias, that establishment media does have a bias. They only see a couple of polls here and there, and some maybe one of those misleading graphics in between their shifts, or when they get home, or when they are changing the channels, or whatever. And so they don't pay attention and see these kinds of trends. Whereas you have to really kind of study it, you have to look at it, you have to follow it intensely to see that there is this bias against Bernie Sanders, against progressives. But look, and it's the reason, of course, is they despise Bernie Sanders and they want to dismiss him. They really do. They want to downplay his chances, and if they could get away with it, I believe they would want to ignore him completely. Thankfully, Bernie Sanders does have independent media, which, will, I wouldn't say necessarily back him, but will tell the truth and give honest coverage to his campaign, whether or not, he does really well in a poll or does poorly in polls, because we care about facts here. Our agenda is only one thing, and that's to tell the truth and to give the coverage to the candidates that they deserve. Okay. All right. Let's move on. Excuse me. All right. So last week, a journalist was arrested by DC officers for the heinous crime of reporting about a story, or I should say, let's start that again here. Last week, a journalist was arrested by DC officers for daring to report and do journalism. So now this is involving a Venezuelan embassy in the United States that was besieged by pro um, pro-opposition forces. So this happened quite a while ago, and the reporter in question is Max Blumenthal. Now, he was arrested on October 25th. So this is months and months after the attempted coup of Venezuela by pro-U.S. forces, right? So now, when he was arrested, Blumenthal was taken to the D.C. Central Jail, where he was held for about 2 days, taken to various different cells and cages, shackled by his hands and ankles for over 5 hours, and his requests for phone calls were denied. So you would think that this kind of treatment would be because he did something absolutely heinous, right? Well, now he was charged with alleged simple assault. Okay, look, a serious charge, right? More specifically, Blumenthal was accused of simple assault by a member of the Venezuelan opposition. Again, the same Venezuelan opposition that was surrounding the embassy, the Venezuelan embassy in Washington. So now, here's the thing. So this was happening, like I said, during the attempted coup of Venezuela, that were trying to overthrow Nicolas Maduro. Now, they had U.S. backing. The Trump administration backed this coup attempt, and so during this, you had, like I said, a siege of the Venezuelan embassy. Now, according to an individual familiar with the case, this arrest warrant later on that happened, again, 5 months later, had originally been rejected for this journalist, for this supposed assault. So they said, "Oh, this reporter assaulted me, and so look into it, arrest it." Initially rejected, 5 months later, dredged back up, and this guy gets arrested. That's insanity. All right. So now, according to the Gray Zone, which, by the way, Max Blumenthal writes for the Gray Zone, a group of activists during the coup had kept a vigil inside the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C., in order to protect it from illegal seizure by U.S.-supported coup leaders. Now, the activists had formed what they called the Embassy Protection Collective. So now, here's the thing. So this collective was apparently welcomed inside the embassy by the Venezuelan government, right? And so they had permission to stay in the embassy to, I guess, protect it, which is something they're able to do because that's literally sovereign territory under international law. So it belongs to Venezuela, right? And in this case, the internationally recognized leader of Venezuela, which at the time, Nicolas Maduro. Okay, so now the Gray Zone reports that violent right-wing activists who supported the Venezuelan opposition had laid siege to the embassy, preventing people, food, and supplies from entering the building. Gray Zone reporter Anya Parampil and Alex Rubenstein, who contributed to the Gray Zone, were embedded inside that embassy, and so they were literally in there at the time. Parampil and journalists, they say, documented right-wing mobs lashing out with racist and sexist invective, as well as violence at Venezuelan solidarity activists who gathered outside the embassy. And so, of course, the main reason that you had these Venezuelan activists is to say that we should not be engaging in regime change wars with other countries. And that makes sense. Look at Afghanistan, look at Iraq, look at all the different times that we've tried regime change. So these activists say, no, we don't want to go to war first in order to steal Venezuelan oil, because that's essentially what it's about. And we don't want to overthrow other countries' leaders. We've had enough of that, especially in South America. So hands off Venezuela, right? So now, court documents that indicate a charge of simple assault stems from Blumenthal's participation in the delivery of food and sanitary supplies to what they call peace activists and journalists inside of the Venezuelan embassy on May 8th of 2019. According to documents, Rubenstein, the brother of journalist Alex Rubenstein, also participated in the food delivery. Rubenstein was arrested over 12 hours after by the Secret Service. He spent 20 hours in jail alongside a man named Gary Condon. president for Veterans for Peace, who was also arrested by the Secret Service for taking part in the food delivery. So apparently, taking food to the embassy is somehow illegal against the law, and you deserve to be arrested and then charged with a phony charge of assault. So now the thing is that Venezuela allowed them in there. They were allowed to be there and were confronted with what they described as mobs of anti-Maduro forces that were allegedly violent, sexist, homophobic, etc. Right? Now, Blumenthal later filed a story explaining how the pro-coup mob outside turned violent, physically assaulting embassy protectors and hurling racist, sexist, and homophobic abuse at others. Blumenthal also documented an opposition activist breaking into and subsequently vandalizing the embassy in violation of international law. And he reported on opposition members also destroying embassy security cameras while the authorities, i.e., Capitol Police, DC Police, and Secret Service, stood by. He believes, Blumenthal does, that by being arrested, he is being basically a victim of retaliation by the United States for taking part in food deliveries as well as doing journalism. So now look, you don't have to side with the Venezuelan government, I certainly don't, to see that this is actually incredibly messed up and actually against people's First Amendment rights. Arresting journalists, people and people who are delivering food to the embassy that were welcomed, by the way, by the legitimate government of Venezuela, is really, really messed up. I mean, this is a huge, huge problem. Okay. We know that the Trump administration, though, supported the coup attempt. I think, again, it comes back to the oil. There are vast reserves of oil in Venezuela that is state-owned, and the opposition leader, Juan Guaido, was in favor of privatizing that oil and selling it to American corporations. He wanted to do what Jair Bolsonaro is doing right now, open up the country to American and international exploitation in order to make money. It's never been about helping the Venezuelan people. Again, not a fan of Nicolas Maduro or the Venezuelan government, but I understand that there are large corporate interests at play here. And so our government works for those corporations, hand in hand. The defense contractors, who would make money, of course, selling weapons to the United States government, weapons that we would use to attack the Venezuelan people, and oil companies, who would then go in and, of course, take those resources and use that to make money. They've been salivating at the thought of a right-wing government and doing regime change in Venezuela. Now, I think most Americans, however, I would wager, are tired of endless war. So now back to the retaliation aspect of this, right? So now the Gray Zone had also published numerous exposés on Venezuelan coup leader Guaido, who the U.S. Government was backing to be the interim president if the coup attempt succeeded, which it did not. Now, their reporting detailed his extensive ties to Washington and to corporate America, of course. Blumenthal was arrested just hours after they published an article on U.S. aid, paying the salaries of Guaido's team as they lobbied the U.S. government. If true, absolutely disastrous. Not only that, but here you have the Venezuelan coup regime's ambassador to the United States, a man named Carlos Vecchio. So now he was actually there at the siege of the embassy, right? Now Vecchio just happens to be a former lawyer for ExxonMobil. So now he was a former lawyer for Exxon, one of the largest oil companies in the world, who, by the way, hid the existence of climate change and has paid numerous think tanks millions upon millions of dollars in order to hide the evidence from the American people and to convince politicians and a large section of the American people that climate change didn't exist, wasn't happening, we shouldn't worry about it. That guy worked for ExxonMobil, okay, and was supposedly going to be the new ambassador to a Guaido Venezuelan government. If it isn't any more clear what this is really about, what that regime change was about, it was, of course, about the oil. Always, always. And so Blumenthal, by the way, uh, for what he says that this is complete and utter falsehoods. He says, quote, this charge is 100% false, fabricated, bogus, untrue, and malicious. I'm firmly convinced that this case is part of a wider campaign of political persecution using the legal system to shut down factual investigative journalism about the coup against Venezuela and the wider policy of economic warfare and regime change waged by the Trump administration. He added that if the government had at least told me I had a warrant, and by the way, that is a key piece of information. 5 months later, after the original charge was dropped, they picked it back up and they didn't even tell Blumenthal. They did instead an FBI raid in the morning. Did not tell him that he had a warrant for his arrest. He said, if I knew, I would have voluntarily surrendered and appeared at my own arraignment. He says, I have nothing to fear because I'm completely innocent of this bogus charge. Instead, he says, and he's not mincing words here, the federal government essentially enlisted the DC police to swat me, ensuring that I would be subjected to an early morning raid and then languish in prison for days without even the ability to call my attorney. I was not party to any violent actions around the Venezuelan embassy. The ginned up claim of simple assault is clearly false. This, again, potentially disastrous, not only for free speech, not only for journalism, but also for activism. And this is a great example of the Trump administration doing political retaliation against journalists and people that they disagree with when they're challenged on regime change wars. Not a good look. All right. One more story here, real quick. All right. Former Republican Governor Scott Walker got a little bit of a dose of irony on Monday when his criticism of socialism backfired. So now on Twitter, Walker tweeted out a picture with Rashida Tlaib and Bernie Sanders standing in front of an empty grocery shelf and said, and let me show you the picture here first. So there it is, standing in front of nearly empty shelves, right? And he said on Twitter, quote, anyone notice the backdrop behind Bernie and Rashida looked like the empty shelves of grocery stores in many socialist countries. Which ones, Scott? Which socialist countries are you talking about? And do they include any country that doesn't actually currently have U.S. or Western sanctions on it for the crime of being a socialist country? I mean, can he answer that? Can anybody answer that? Okay, anyway. So now, Gateway Pundit also ran their own piece on this titled, Perfect! Two radicals, Bernie and Rashida, stand in front of empty grocery store shelves and push socialism. So now, let's be clear here. What Bernie Sanders and Rashida Tlaib are pushing is not socialism, right? It's social democracy. So, like, I don't know, Norway, Finland, Denmark, to an extent, even Germany, right? Because, look, one of Sanders' plans is to have part worker ownership of companies. You know who else does that? The socialist utopia of Germany. Oh, wait, they're not socialist at all. But they are far more to the left than we are here in America, even under a conservative government. That kind of shows you how far to the right the United States actually is. So now, here's the ironic part, right? Now, the photo was taken at the last stop of a corporate greed tour, which Representative Tlaib takes Detroit visitors on. And so this shows, of course, the effect of corporations that don't pay taxes or pay their workers so low that they had to end up having to actually go either to food banks, which is what is in that picture, and take government benefits. In fact, Walmart tells people, we pay you so low, so you need to go on food stamps in order to survive because we don't plan on paying you anymore. All right, so now, like I said, Sanders and Talib's stop was at a food pantry where, of course, you have food, water, clothes. They're given to low-income families in Detroit that need them. These are the same people that are actually left behind when it comes to capitalism, the type of capitalism that Scott Walker believes in. Now, the pantry is on the other side of the city from some of the other stops, which included Marathon Oil and Little Caesars, who, by the way, got millions of dollars in tax breaks. So, congratulations on that. Among other provisions, the pantry is said to have been running out of bottled water, and by the way, this is due to the fact that a number of families in Detroit have had their water shut off, so they can't afford water. They can't afford to pay the bills, right? And running out of food, running out of clothes, essentially running out of everything. Now, the Reverend Rosalind Bouillet, the executive director of this pantry, which is the Brightmoor Pantry, pointed out that the shelves were empty because of the overwhelming demand there is for both food and water in this country. The pantry sees about 1,700 families each month. 1,700 Detroit families that are in need that go to these pantries. Okay. So now, the shelves, Bouillet says, are so empty because we're doing our job, because people need the food. That shows the inhumanity. She added that America needs to do better, and that's the sadness of it. Well, you know who agrees? Rashida Tlaib and Bernie Sanders, who say that not only should we do better, we can do better. We're the wealthiest country in the world. Of course we can do better. Now, in case you think that, oh no, these people are just losers, they refuse to get a job, and just rely on handouts all day. First, that'd be a terrible way to live. The Reverend Bouillet points out that many people in need of food in the U.S. are actually employed, they actually work, but receive wages so low that they can't actually cover the bills. For this community, she says, any community in America to be without food and water, to constantly have to live with housing insecurity or water insecurity, it's so utterly ridiculous. It is so evil. It is evil in and of itself. So now, Scott Walker claims to be a good Christian, right? But here he is laughing at a food pantry that is serving generally needing people and using it to bash against socialism, right? Well, again, this isn't socialism. This is happening under capitalism, right? And here's the other thing, right? You want to claim you're a good Christian. There's literally passages in the Bible where Scott's boy, Jesus, literally gives away free food. Not only that, it appears that in the Bible, Jesus and his disciples really like giving out free stuff. Free healing of the sick. Again, free food, free wine, right? Turning water into wine. That's kind of awesome. Not only that, free lodging. In fact, the Bible tells people, hey, look, treat the immigrant as you would yourself. Feed them, clothe them, give them a place to stay. Interesting. And as a counterpoint here, Jesus goes after the wealthy. He whips the bankers and chases them out of the temple. Usury or interest, by the way, also banned in the Bible. It's a sin. Interesting. It appears that the only church or the only religion that Scott Walker adheres to is the Church of Wealth. Now, Bouillet also adds that the former governor, despite being from a more affluent area, also would probably have people starving in his constituency too, despite, of course, believing so much in capitalism and running basically his state as a capitalist utopia. And yet, in every state, by the way, where they try this, where they cut taxes for the rich, and they, basically try to eliminate the income tax and cut services for the poor, you actually end up having way more poor people in those areas. It's really strange how that works out. Now, Bouye says this about that. That tells you how disconnected he is from the people in his own community. I promise you that someone in his community will exist in the margins of society. We know that to be true all over the United States. And it is. In fact, in Wisconsin, devastating numbers. 1 in 5 children live with food insecurity. Nationally, it's 1 in 9. Disaster. So now, does he really care about that? No, I don't think so. I think he cares about tax cuts for himself and for his donors. Whereas Bouye, Tlaib, and Sanders, and the people he derives as wrongly as socialists, actually do care about humanity and helping our fellow man. Okay. All right. That's it. That's all I got time for. Thank you for going around the nation with me today. Please like and share the stream. I've got a couple of super chats to thank people for. Jeanette Villalona says around the world is the best. It's actually around the nation, but unless you mean something else. And then I'll have to raise the volume later for next show. Then if I raise it too much, we get static. So it's kind of a rough thing to do here. But I'll do what I can. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Jeanette. And thank you everybody for watching. Please like and share the stream. Like I said, consider becoming a patron. Patreon.com/TYTNation or a channel member. All right, guys. Thank you. Love you guys. And remember, change begins with you. Good night, nation. We'll see you tomorrow for Halloween.